So welcome everybody to our third webinar of our Landscapes That Last series. These webinars are being brought to you by North Carolina Sea Grant and our partners of the Coastal Landscapes Initiative. Our intent is to bring these to you monthly throughout 2026 so that we hope that you can continue to join us on other webinars and every month. My name is Gloria Putnam. I help to coordinate the initiative and I'm on staff at North Carolina Sea Grant. We are recording the webinar today and we're going to notify everybody by email when it's posted. It's taking a few weeks. We have to do a little bit of post-processing, but it will be available for you. Just want to mention that our next webinar is going to be on March 19th, again at the lunch hour, and our main speaker is going to be Rachel Veal. Rachel provided the webinar in January. It was the what, why, and how of nature-friendly landscaping. And next month, she is going to focus a little bit more on the how you do, and the things that you need to consider and some common pitfalls to avoid when applying nature-friendly strategies. Registration for that opened today. So I'll put the link in the chat when I hand over the microphone to Robbie. And you can go ahead and claim your spot for March. But today we're going to focus on managing invasive plants. It's actually a topic that's very passionate, that I'm very passionate about, and it's one that people have asked for more information on. So we're very fortunate to have Robbie Davis with us today. He's with Native Plant Matters North Carolina, or NC. I'm not sure how he actually says it, but he's going to be presenting to us today. He's going to tell you a little bit more about himself. But I want to note that he is deeply respected and appreciated by those that have used his service, whether it's in removing invasive plants or planting native ones in their place. Robbie also made me aware that this week is Invasive Species Awareness Week. So we're all participating in this week by being a part of this webinar. And I also want to thank my colleague, which we've heard from already, Christy Perrin. She's with the Coastal Landscapes Initiative. She helps with the Coastal Landscapes Initiative. It's with Sea Grant and the Water Resources Research Institute. She's going to be helping direct questions. We're going to have questions at the end, but we're also going to stop along the way at different points to take your questions. So on that note, I want to have you look down at the bottom of your screen and you're going to see something that says Q&A, literally. And if you click on that, you should see something up in the corner that says ask a question. So what we ask you to do is to please put your questions in the Q&A. It really makes it a lot easier for us to manage and to see, what's being submitted. And if you have resources or comments you want to share, you can put that in the chat. But so again, make sure that you put your questions in the Q&A. And I have a few things I want to know before I hand the microphone over to Robbie. Let me see. So our CLI partners have addressed the issue of invasive plants before. We created a product you may already be familiar with. It's called Plant This Instead, Eco-Friendly Alternatives to Harmful Ornamental Plants. And we also did a webinar in March of 2023 on the same topic where we go into a lot of depth about some of the native plants. You can find both of these. We recorded that webinar and you can find it on our webpage along with the Plant This Instead document. So we're not going to go into a lot of background about invasive plants and all of their impacts. You can find that because you can find that online. But we do want to make some notes about what an invasive plant is. And that specifically, it is a specific category of plants. We're not talking about native plants that a lot of people might well call assertive or aggressive. We're talking about, and there are some legal definitions of what an invasive plant is, but there's not really an accepted across the board biological term of it. So what we're going to do, this is the definition that we're working with today, and it's a non-native plant to a specific area or a particular ecosystem that causes ecological harm or environmental harm. In essence, what it does is um, invasive plants simplify an ecosystem. They prevent the native plants from growing, proliferating, and providing the benefits that we know that are important for us. So a couple of other things, but we're going to talk about managing, controlling invasive plants. But I feel like I would be a little remiss if I didn't also mention a couple of things that to keep from spreading them. First of all, you need to know the invasive plants in your area. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. You can look at our plant list and say document. Robbie, I think, is going to identify some resources that will also be helpful. But the North Carolina Invasive Species Control Council, has some information. The North Carolina Native Plant Society, and there's a great website at the University of Georgia called Bugwood that you can get some information from. Obviously, in addition to knowing them, don't purchase them or accept them from loving friends and family that may not know that they are invasive. Of course, you can help educate them about them, what is invasive, and also sometimes we can unwittingly bring them on our property through compost and mulch or even potted plants. So try to uh, buy these materials from trusted resources so that the materials are as clean as they can be. I want to mention just a few of our invasive coastal plants that just to kind of get us thinking about the specific species of concern. And Robbie's going to go into detail about some of these that are a little more difficult to identify. But so calorie pear, or also cultivar's Bradford pear, we will soon, unfortunately, start seeing it bloom all all along roadsides. There is the mimosa with those crazy Dr. Seuss flowers that people love. They are kind of cool, but the plant is not is is problematic. We have Tree of Heaven, and then we have the privets, the ligustrum sisters, and Iliagnus, the olive brothers. And when it comes to coastal vines, we have several that are problematic, and not just at the coast, but in the Piedmont as well. English ivy, Asian wisteria, a couple of varieties there, Japanese honeysuckle, and clematis, however you want to pronounce it. And just a couple more slides. Here is a property that is outside of Kinston. It's Karen Mulcahy has above the Briary Native plant nursery, and she's done some great work on her property removing privet. The picture on the left shows an area where she has not been able to get to. I took this picture, I want to say it was in 2023 when I visited her property. And then the picture on the right is where she has actually been able to go in with some assistance and remove the privet. And the natives have just really, a lot of wonderful ferns have reestablished there. And obviously on the left, it gets to that simplification of an ecosystem that I mentioned before. My point of showing this is that we can, by removing invasive plants, we really can have some amazing ecological benefits. So our efforts pay off. And one other thing, I sent folks today a PDF of some information that I gathered on beach vitex. Beach vitex has been an issue on our dunes in coastal North Carolina for decades. There used to be a beach vitex task force that helped address it. But because neither Robbie nor I are experts on this topic, we gathered some information from some experts from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. I shared that with you because this is applicable to some individuals that are on the call for removing it yourself or for communities getting some assistance. So that is my part of the information, and I'm gonna pass it over to Robbie. I have to stop my share quickly, or not so quickly.
Okay.
So hopefully folks got that in the email this morning.
Can you see the
I can't
slideshow?
see the slideshow. Now I can see the slideshow.
Is it good?
Yeah, we can see. Christy, you can see?
Yes, I see the slideshow.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, great.
So I appreciate you having me in today for Invasive Species Awareness Week. It's an exciting time for our people in my business because everyone's talking about invasive plants this week. So my presentation today is going to go over just some of the basic removal methods that you can use to kind of control or eradicate these invasive species. I'll be stopping throughout for questions. If you have some, please put them in the question area for Christy to look over. Um, so what you're seeing first on the first slide is on the left is a tree covered in English ivy. In the center is an area that is completely covered with Japanese stiltgrass. And on the right is a tree that's being attacked by Chinese wisteria. Quickly about me, I was a science teacher in Wake County for about 7 years. And then when my older son was born, I became a stay-at-home dad. And when he went back to school after COVID, I had been teaching children about ecosystems for so long, but there were no companies out there that would help homeowners control the invasive species on their properties. There are companies that do large scale invasive removal, but there weren't as many options for a homeowner whose yard was covered in ivy or had a bunch of privet. And so I started a business to help homeowners remove invasives from their property and then replace those with native plants. You see pictures of my kids there. My son on the left is killing a Japanese privet, and my son in the center there is pointing at a butterfly. You might not be able to see the butterfly very well. Um, so our business, Native Plants Matter, we do residential, municipal, commercial removal projects and installations of native plants. We only plant natives, and we will remove other non-native plants if some non-native plants are not invasive, but if the customer wants us to remove them, we will to replace them with natives. Oops, wrong way. So at the beginning, I just kind of like to point out that a lot of people just think if their yard has something growing in it, then it's perfect. My yard is green, who cares? And the picture is one of our clients in Garner. In a pretty typical suburban yard, they have a large lawn, they have a Bradford pear tree in the center, and all of the plants on the foundation are from Asia. And part of the reason that people in my business do this is because there's a movement in the native plant community where we can use our residential gardens to help the environment by supporting the local ecosystem. The plants from Asia do not support insects and they don't help the food web. And so if you replace those Asian plants with plants that are native, you'll get more insects, you'll get more pollinators, and from that you can rebuild the local ecosystem. So if you are interested in this movement, the professor that he's our guru, is Doug Ptolemy. He has many books. The most famous one is Nature's Best Hope, and it's about using your yard to do good things for the environment. So if you're interested in kind of learning more about how you can make your yard into a native habitat, I would strongly suggest his books. I hear this one a lot. It's not invasive in my yard. So I'll do a presentation and someone will tell me that they have a mimosa tree, for example, but they don't have any other mimosa trees in their yard. But if you drive down the street, there's probably 20 to 30 that have popped up. Um, Invasives are spread in ways that we can't control. They're spread by the wind, they're spread by water. Humans spread the seeds, animals spread the seeds, and birds. A lot of the species that we deal with the birds have spread by eating the berries and spreading the berries to new places. And we can't control all of those methods to control the spread. Um, the picture there is a park that we are working in Raleigh, called Fallon Park, and it is a 11-acre park that is completely covered with English ivy, and you'll see a Nandina in the photo as well. There is an economic cost that's happening now for invasive removal. This is an old estimate, but it was at almost $35 billion was being spent by the United States for invasive control. And that comes from the Invasive Plant Council. That's an old estimate. It's probably gone up. So there is a economic and also an ecological reason to remove these invasives. So just some quickly, why are invasives so dangerous to the environment? They have certain characteristics that make them, they're invasive plants for a reason. And so just quickly, they grow fast, they make a lot of seeds. Those seeds grow quickly. Those seeds can grow in lots of different soil environments. And these invasives have longer fruiting and flowering periods. And the last one at the bottom, the invasives are not being controlled by other organisms in the environment because they are not native. So in our native ecosystem, there's a balance where plants are being controlled by some other organisms. But when you bring in plants from other parts of the world, our local ecosystem does not control their spread. So the deer may not eat them, the rabbits may not eat them, they may not be controlled by bacteria or it's and our plants are invasive in other parts of the world because they are not controlled there. So that's the reason that these plants spread so quickly. Gloria asked me to go through just a few of the common invasive plants and just do a quick few minutes on how you identify them. I think most people have probably seen these, even if you didn't know what you were looking at, because they are so prolific. Chinese privet, there is not a house that we go to in Raleigh that does not have Chinese privet, usually. It is a very prolific spreading invasive plant. You can see the picture on the right. The bushes and trees make so many berries, and the birds are spreading them rapidly. And they do grow in sun, they grow in shade, they grow in wet areas, they grow in dry areas, and they will choke out the sunlight for the other plants as they grow taller. There are sections of North Carolina where the only thing growing are Chinese privet, and we're losing so much of our biodiversity from privet taking over areas. So to identify it, the leaves, they are smaller than the second one, the Japanese privet. They are smooth and it's hard. I see them all the time, so it's hard to describe them. But the leaves are opposite and they are smooth and rounded. And then a Japanese privet, the leaves are a little larger and they are also smooth. So if you have camellias, they'll look very similar, but camellias have a serrated edge to the leaves, whereas Japanese privets have a smooth edge. They also make a large amount of berries, and the birds are also spreading them widely. Japanese privets are still widely planted. There are many different cultivars that the nursery industry sells. They're still widely planted. And they will grow anywhere. My picture on the right is a sewer easement in Cary where we found the Japanese privet growing out of the concrete. So they are growing and still being sold. So they're still being put out there by nurseries. So the Elaeagnus species, the autumn and thorny olive, the two pictures on the center and the left, well, it's my left, are autumn olive, which is a deciduous shrub. It will lose its leaves in the winter. And the picture on the right is a thorny olive. Thorny olive is an evergreen shrub, so it's still widely planted. A new housing development went in near me, and the entire road front was planted with thorny olive. Both of them will make a large amount of berries, and Elaeagnus is a nitrogen-fixing shrub, so it can pretty much grow anywhere. The berries are edible. I've had them, they're not that impressive. But the easiest way to identify them is the back of the leaves have a silvery sheen to them. Um, and the berries have kind of a speckled look when they're ripe. Tree of Heaven is an emerging topic because it is the main host plant for spotted lanternflies. And as the spotted lanternflies move into our state, they are going to use Tree of Heaven to reproduce. Um, we are tracking spotted lanternflies through Virginia. The only active colony is in Winston-Salem area, and if you see a spotted lanternfly, you're supposed to report it to the state so they can investigate. Tree of Heaven is its preferred host plant. It's not the only plant that it uses, but it's its preferred host plant. Um, the way to identify them, the leaves, I don't know if they can see my pointer, but it's
Yeah,
here.
you can see yours
Okay.
clearly.
The leaves are opposite and they look very similar to a black walnut and a sumac, but they have a little thumbprint at the top of the leaf or near the stem. There's a little thumbprint that sticks out. And the easiest way, if you're having trouble identifying, the easiest way is to crush a leaf and smell it. If you crush up a black walnut leaf or a sumac, they kind of smell earthy and they smell nice. If you crush up a Tree of Heaven leaf, it will smell like terrible spoiled peanut butter or sesame oil that's gone rancid. They have a really strong peanut buttery smell if you crush them. There are male and female trees. So the male trees produce large amounts of pollen, which is not great for human health. And the female trees produce huge amounts of seed pods. This picture is in the center is just one branch, and that's how many seeds this female tree was making. So the wind spreads these seeds wide and far. And the bark kind of has a grayish look to it, and it's a very thin bark. It reminds me of like grapefruit rind. It's very thin and brittle. Um, the problem with Tree of Heaven is it cannot be cut down without a large amount of suckering happening. The tree will know it's under attack and it will send up suckers all along its root system if you cut it down. So what we have to do first is treat it before it's cut down. If it's cut down at all. I mean, we prefer not to cut them. The picture on the left is a typical Tree of Heaven where it will be growing inside something else. That's kind of the look that it has. The picture in the middle is a seedling. The client in the center, they had cut the tree down without realizing, and it started sending up these suckering seedlings. And the picture on the right is one of our clients in Chapel Hill that owns a farm, and she had the Tree of Heaven cut down, and the root sucker came up through a crack in the barn's foundation. And so it was growing out of the foundation of the barn. The Tree of Heaven, when it's cut down, it will send up suckers. Anywhere it can find an opening, it will send up one.
I have a question
And
that
Clement,
came up about
sure.
just about the seeds before we move on. Are they really similar looking to maple seeds? And if so, how do you distinguish them? They get spread.
Not really. I mean, they have a different similar, but I don't know if people can see, but it's kind of like there's a seed inside, like you can see the little seed inside the pod. Um, and the trees don't look the same at all. So I don't know that that would be hugely confusing if you saw a maple seed. I think you would know if it was a Tree of Heaven, because there would have to be one nearby there would have to be a female tree somewhere making the seeds. I'm not sure I answered their question, but I think you'd be able to tell the difference just based on the proximity. And when we find baby Tree of Heavens somewhere or seedlings, we will start looking around for the female adult tree that is producing all the seeds. Because that's the one you really need to kill first, so it stops making more. Clematis is a problem in the Piedmont. It's not as widespread as some of these others. So the clematis kind of has a heart-shaped leaf. And at different stages in its development, it does have sort of a silvery variegated band in the center. Not always, so I don't want to say it always has that because I don't want to confuse people, but that it does have that heart-shaped leaf. It's a vine, so it will climb things, and the problem is that it makes a lot of seeds, and so once it starts making those seeds, it's very hard to get rid of the seed bank that it's established. There is a native clematis, and the difference is really the flowers are not different enough that you could maybe tell, but the leaves are very different. So the plant on the left is native, and you can see that it is not rounded at all, or smooth at all. And the invasive clematis is on the right, and you can see the difference in the leaves. The leaves are smoother and don't have those little ridges and teeth. Um, I don't know, Christy, if you want to stop here and if there's any questions I should answer before we move on.
Yeah, there is a question about if you have multiple seedlings of Tree of Heaven, how do you treat them without cutting them down? And I'm wondering also if you're going to get to removal methods, if we want to hold
Yeah.
off on the removal questions until
If,
then.
if the tree of heaven, if it's a baby seedling, you can do something called a tug test. And what a tug test is, if it's a baby, a brand new baby tree of heaven, they actually pull up kind of easily. You just have to give it a little tug. If it comes out of the ground, it's a baby. If it's resisting you, then it's probably a root sucker. And that's a harder issue to deal with because it's part of the parent tree. The parent tree is sending up root suckers. So when we find little baby ones, we'll do a tug test. If we can pull them out of the ground, we'll pull them out of the ground without treating them. But if you tug on it and it's resisting you, that means it's a root sucker and you've got a larger problem because it's part of the parent adult root system. Hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah,
We're
and
gonna get
then
oh
yeah,
Christy,
just
sorry.
oh no, sorry. There's just a few other questions about how to get rid of certain plants. So I think we can wait until you're done with the management
Okay,
methods to see if you cover
okay,
them.
okay, sounds good. Um, so I'm gonna move into sort of a section on management methods. Um, and the ones we're going to cover today are mechanical removal, grazing, cut stump, foliar applications, basal bark treatments, and hack and squirt. And these are they're all of them are very useful in certain circumstances. There's no for removing invasives, there's really not one method that works for everything. So if you hire someone that mostly does lawn care, you can't just go and spray every plant. Like that's not going to work. There are certain plants that have to be treated in a certain way. So what we're going to do is go through the different removal methods, and I will sort of point out which ones can be used for specific plants. The picture is one of the most giant multiflora roses we've ever dealt with, and this was in Wendell. It was large, large multiflora rose. So mechanical control is when you either use your hands or a weed wrench or a shovel and you're digging up or pulling up plants by hand or string trimming with a weed eater or a string trimmer. Mechanical control does not use any herbicide, so some people enjoy that method because they don't want to use herbicide. Some It does not work on all plants, but it is a method you can use if you have a small infestation or if you have a young infestation. Pulling and digging, it works best on younger plants. It works best after a rainstorm. Like today, we have a crew out removing bamboo, which they are cutting, but you can also they're pulling up some ivy since it's raining here today. Um, and so this involves using some kind of method to remove the invasives that does not involve herbicides. So you're pulling, you're digging, you're string trimming or cutting things down. Um, I still recommend for all of these methods that you use some kind of protection for yourself when you're doing them. So each of the sections is going to have a PPE component. I would strongly advise wearing gloves. I had an employee come his first day and he wore short sleeves and we were removing English ivy, but the poison ivy was mixed in. And so he had rashes up and down his arms. A long sleeve shirt and gloves is a good idea, especially, and also long pants. You don't want to be walking through areas with shorts if there's lots of poison ivy, or some people are allergic to English ivy, some people are allergic to different plants, and you don't want to find that out with getting a rash. Boots are a good idea, especially in an area where you're doing removal work. For example, where my crew is working today, some bamboo had been removed and a lot of the stumps are sticking up. So boots are a good idea just to protect your feet. And when you're pulling things up, I recommend eye protection. We have had, things fly into your eyes when you're pulling things up. Or if you're string trimming, you definitely want to protect your eyes. So the benefits of mechanical control, you do not have to use chemicals. It will have a moderate level of success. If it's a small infestation, you can handle that with mechanical removal as long as it's a small infestation. And some of it doesn't matter what time of the year you do it. So the picture on the right is creeping liriape or monkey grass. That you could be digging that up all year long. It doesn't have to be removed at a specific time of year. This picture is from an elementary school in Cary. They have a large area of liriape in their courtyard, and they were concerned about the students being in that area. The drawbacks of mechanical removal, it is more time consuming. Digging all that liriape up would take time. It's not always practical for large infestations. For example, we were, like I was talking about earlier, we're doing a project for the city of Raleigh, and it's an 11-acre park. Removing all that English ivy by hand would be very time consuming. So it's not always practical for large scale infestations. It's not recommended for certain species. I'll point out a few later where I do not advise you to dig them up or remove them by hand. It does loosen the soil, so if you are digging in an area that is prone to erosion, you could make the soil loose. Also, when you disturb the soil, there are seeds living in the soil. The seed bank will come up and something else may start to grow. So it's important to do follow-up visits to make sure that something new hasn't invaded the area, which is where possible reinfestation comes in. If you disturb the soil, something will probably start growing in that disturbed area. Skin irritation can happen when you're doing mechanical removal. I actually am allergic to English ivy, so I have to be very careful in the spring. English ivy puts out the most amount of sap in the spring, and so I have to be very careful in the spring when I'm around English ivy because I get rashes from English ivy. Poison ivy obviously will make a rash. Some people are allergic to some of the native plants that could be growing in with these. And some of them have disposal concerns, and I'll talk in a minute. If you dig up some of these plants, they really can't be composted, they can't be taken to the landfill, they kind of have to be disposed of in a special way. Plants that can be controlled mechanically. Some of the vines, you can hand pull English ivy, you can hand pull Japanese honeysuckle. I would not recommend trying to pull wisteria. It's a really frustrating experience. You'd have to start digging that one up. It's very easy to pull seedlings of shrubs. Like privet actually pulls up very easily when it's young. Um, if you have a weed wrench or we have a polar bear, which is another brand of weed wrench. You can pull up tree seedlings with a polar bear or a weed wrench. It helps. It helps if the soil's moist. The picture there is Italian arum. Gloria said that maybe not much of a concern on the coastal areas. We have started seeing it in the Piedmont more. The issue with the arum is it is resistant to herbicide, so it really needs to be dug up. But you have to put it into plastic bags and throw it. You can't take it to the landfill or compost it because it will just keep growing. Monkey grass or liriope is we usually have to dig that up when we're doing removal work. Vinca or periwinkle can be hand pulled. It's not easy, but it can be hand pulled. And Japanese stiltgrass, some people will hand pull it if they have just a small amount. We also do a lot of string trimming of it. If you string trim it down before it makes seeds, you can prevent it from spreading. It's an annual, so its existence is making seeds and then dying. If you can kill it before it makes seeds, you can control its reproduction. So we spend a lot of time in late August and September string trimming Japanese stiltgrass, which doesn't involve herbicide. Grazing is kind of a hot topic right now. There are companies now that are starting to have goat rental. So grazing is where you use animals to eat down. They will eat the areas of invasive plants to try to gain access for the humans to get in there if it's a really overgrown area. You can bring in grazing animals to help. Goats are common. There's more companies coming up in the Piedmont of where you can rent goats to come to your property to kind of help start the process. And I say start the process because grazing is not a one-time fix. You either have to have the grazing animals come repeatedly or you have to plan for follow-up treatments. Because when you have the top layer of the plants eaten, the root system may still be active and the plant will regrow, especially the vines. The vines like wisteria and kudzu, and there's a picture of on the page of kudzu because that's a really common one that goats will eat. The goats will not kill the root system of kudzu, so there has to be some follow-up treatments unless the goats are going to stay and eat it repeatedly. The picture on the left is one of our clients that had hired the goats, and the goats came through and ate everything, but this is what happened afterwards. A field of poison ivy had popped up, and so the homeowner um, had to have us come in and treat the poison ivy so they could actually use their property. The benefits of the grazing, you do not have to use chemicals, and it can be successful if it's done repeatedly. And the timing is flexible. The goats can eat, or other animals can eat throughout the year. The only drawbacks, there's a few. The goats or other animals they're not going to just eat the invasive plants. They're going to eat native plants as well. Now, the research shows that the native plants will come back. So it's not, but there will be a large amount of clearing will happen. So they're not going to leave the natives and just eat the invasive plants. You do have to plan for follow-up treatment. We've heard stories of people who hire goats to come through, and then a year or two later, it's back to the way it was. If no follow-up treatment is done. Renting goats is usually costly. It takes a lot for them to bring goats to a property and take care of the goats. So it's usually a costly option. And just when you're bringing in grazing animals, you have to think about the logistics. The goats have to be contained to the area you want them to work in, so they either need to be tied up or you need to put in fencing. So there is some logistics to keeping the grazing animals where you want them to work. Christy, are there any questions on before I go into like herbicide use?
I would say, yeah, there's a couple questions. What's a good method for removing invasive weeds in your yard without hand pulling, particularly if it's hard on your back? And I heard you say strings. I guess it probably depends on the type. Like you said,
Yeah,
string trimming works
it
on.
would depend on which weeds are in the yard. Um, and it would depend if what the person wants to do with it after they're done. Like if there's good plants in there that they want to keep, that's a little harder. than if it's an area where they're going to start over with new plants,
Mhm.
I guess. And it would really depend on what's growing there, kind of. So
Yeah.
sorry, that's not very helpful.
Yeah, it
Is it?
seems like it's situational, a little bit
Yeah, yeah,
situational.
yeah.
Yeah, some other methods questions. So somebody asked if any of these plants can be burned after removing them. Is that is that a means of disposal? And if so, why or why
Um,
not?
I'm always a little hesitant with the burning. Just like, let's say, for instance, you're removing English ivy, but there's poison ivy mixed in. If you burn poison ivy and you inhale it, you can get really sick, usually hospitalized, because the poison ivy, if you inhale it, gets in your lungs and you get a rash like internally. And also, when you're burning, you have to be really careful about the weather, like a wind. Is it a dry spell? So some of them, maybe it would depend on the situation of what the person, like where they live. And like we work for the National Guard and they do prescribed burning, but they only do it. It has to be very specific weather conditions for them to do burning. So I'm really hesitant to just say that that's a catch-all. I think it would really depend on the person's situation. We have somebody that lives kind of on a farm, and they have a giant privet bonfire once a year after we go through and cut all their privets. We make a pile, and they have a big privet bonfire, and it's like their celebration of killing privet. But I don't know that that would work because that person doesn't live kind of in a residential area. So I think that would depend on the person's situation. Again, I don't know if that's really helpful.
Yeah, a lot of these are not like black and white solutions, and we
Yeah.
understand that. So I think it makes sense. Um, I'm going to ask another question about grazing. So, do you see any invasives that are grazed by deer? Somebody mentioned sweet autumn clematis.
Um, the deer will eat, they'll nibble on lariape. Um, some people say they eat ivy. I've never really experienced that. If they would eat ivy, there wouldn't be so much. I have not found anything that will eat stilt grass. It must taste terrible. The deer will eat kind of privet, baby privets. The deer will sometimes graze on those, if there's nothing else available. The rabbits will eat certain ones that are low growing. But like I said earlier, the reason that some of these are so spreading so prolifically is because the ecosystem's not controlling them. Um, yeah,
Okay, let me ask two more quick questions
yeah.
about mechanical, and then we'll let you move on because I want to make
Okay.
sure you have enough time to finish.
Yeah.
Um, so mechanical removal, do you have a tool recommendation for something that you can do where you're standing up?
Like a weed wrench?
Is
Is
that
that what
what
they're
it's
asking?
called, a weed wrench? Like if someone were to look in the store?
There's a couple common ones. Polar Bear is a common brand. There's one called Extractigator. We have a Polar Bear. Some people love Extractigators. I don't own one, so I can't speak to that. We have a Polar Bear, and the Polar Bear has an adjustable base, so you can the what grabs onto the trunk of the tree is adjustable, so you can use it for small things and bigger things. The only problem with the weed wrench is if you don't, for certain invasives, if you're pulling it and it breaks off, it will regrow. Like some of the roots, if you don't get all the root system out, some of it might regrow. So you have to do follow-up visits, if you're doing pulling with a weed wrench. Is that kind of what they were asking?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah, one more mechanical question and then let's move on. So you talked
Okay.
about going back and doing repeat treatments. So can that be a practical solution for a long term, like to keep repeat cutting? Will that control if you
For
just
certain things, if you keep cutting it over and over again, we have clients that do not want to use herbicide and have English ivy, so we will go and string trim it a couple times a year, and it needs its leaves to make energy. So if you keep cutting certain ones, it will starve out the root system. That is a longer term. That's a long-term project. For certain invasives, they are destined or determined to live, and you can keep cutting them. And sometimes, if you keep cutting, like, but if you keep cutting wisteria, it's just going to keep growing. Or if you keep cutting tree of heaven, you're going to be doing that for a while to keep it from growing back. It really depends on which invasives they're trying to cut down. Um, like I have one client that cuts the bamboo. She has bamboo coming from her neighbor and cuts it every spring and has controlled it through that. But she doesn't use any herbicide. She just repeatedly cuts it back. So for certain plants that would work, and others I'm not sure. It depends on which plant the person is asking about.
right, this is probably a good time to move on to other
Okay,
methods as well.
sounds good. So I'm just going to quickly, when I talk about herbicides, sometimes people have a lot of concerns, and I understand that. I was a science teacher, and I have young children. It's not my desire to harm the earth. Unfortunately, herbicides are a necessary tool. If you're going to do large scale invasive removal, herbicides are a necessary tool. But you can do it in a way that's ethical and responsible. And most of the people in my business use herbicide responsibly. An herbicide is any substance that is used to control, inhibit growth, or kill the plant. So even something like vinegar, if you buy really strong vinegar, is still considered listed as an herbicide. You may have a label on it. Every herbicide that you would purchase would have a label. And I want to just point out, this is a picture of Triclopyr 4. We use that for Tree of Heaven and Princess trees. The label is not just this part on the front. If you notice on the side, there's a part that peels away, and it's actually a booklet. And the entire booklet is the label. So Triclopyr, it's about 6 pages long. The glyphosate that we buy is an 80-page booklet. So all of the pages in those booklets are bound by law, and to use herbicides, you should be familiar with the entire label, not just the front page. Herbicides can be broken into two categories. There's selective and non-selective. So a non-selective herbicide like glyphosate will kill any plant that you spray it on. And a selective herbicide can target specific plants. So there's broadleaf weed killers, like something like a lawn company would use to keep the broadleaf weeds out of your lawn. But there's also grass herbicides. So down in the corner, I have a picture of a grass herbicide that we use if you're only trying to kill some grass. Also, another topic to pay attention to is glyphosate and triclopyr do not travel through the soil into surrounding plants. There are herbicides that if you spray them in an area, they will travel through the soil and they can affect the plants around the one you're trying to target. So you have to check the label and make sure where you're spraying or using it, if it's going to affect the other plants that are around that area. The herbicide label on the front, it usually will either be page 1 or page 2, always has a section on PPE, which is what you need to do to protect yourself if you're using this herbicide. So in this example on the right, this one requires long sleeve shirt and long pants and shoes plus socks. That's the only thing that they require by law that you wear if you're going to use that herbicide. Can you go beyond that to protect yourself? Yes. My employees, when they use herbicide, I require them to wear a respirator if they're spraying herbicide, and that's just a company policy. The label at the bottom, the label will also have a section on first aid. So it will tell you If you get it in your eyes, what do you do? If you inhale it, what do you do? If you get it on your skin, what do you do? And it will give you specific directions on what to do if that herbicide gets on you or gets in your eyes or you breathe it in. So that's another important section to review. And the whole label is important, but I'm just picking a few things to point out. The label will also have near the PPE section, there will be a section on the environmental hazards. So, for example, this herbicide, it says do not apply directly to the water or areas where water is present or could become present. So this herbicide is a terrestrial herbicide. It's not to be used in aquatic settings. If you do need to use something in an aquatic setting, there are specific herbicides that are designed for aquatic areas. For example, we use Roundup Custom, which is an aquatic version of glyphosate that doesn't do the damage to the waterways that the terrestrial-based glyphosate would do. I'm going to move into the methods of removal that do use herbicide, and that way, yeah, I'm running out of time. Sorry, Gloria. Cut stump is where you are cutting trees or shrubs down and you're painting the stump with a concentrated version of the herbicide. They can be treated with a dauber bottle, a spray bottle, a pump sprayer, or even a paintbrush. You can paint onto the stump. And you only have to paint the outer layer. The picture there is my foot next to a Chinese privet. And when we chainsawed it down, we only painted the outer circle because that's where the veins of the plants are on the outer circle. And so if you paint the outer rim, it will draw that herbicide down into the root system. It is a time-sensitive. Cut stump does not work as well in the spring as the plants are pushing energy up to make new leaves. The herbicide might get pushed out of the stump. What you want to do is wait till the summer where there's more of an exchange, or the fall is a great time because the plants are drawing energy into their roots to get ready for the winter. So if you can paint those stumps in the fall, the herbicide gets pulled down into the root system more effectively. PPE for doing cut stump, you definitely want to wear gloves, long sleeve shirts, long sleeve pants, boots, and eye protection. For some of them, you might want to consider a respirator depending on how the smell affects you. And some of the work, it just depends which herbicide you're using. You have to check the label and see which one requires additional protection. The benefits of cut stump, and we use cut stump a lot, is that the herbicide is concentrated in that one area. You're only painting it on that stump. It's not getting released into the environment in a wide method. And it's a very effective control method for certain plants. The drawbacks, it can't be used on every species. Like I said earlier, tree of heaven, unless it's in an area where you definitely have to cut it down, it's not a great idea to cut certain ones like tree of heaven or princess trees. And the summer and the fall are the best seasons. You can still do some cut stump work in the winter on warmer days, and just the spring is not the best time. Here's just a couple examples. This is a tree in downtown Raleigh that we were trying to save. The picture on the left is before we cut the vines, and the picture on the right is after we cut the vines and we went back to do follow-up. And you can just see how much healthier the tree looks. The second picture here is an area that had been infested, and Gloria showed a good picture of Chinese wisteria and how much it colonizes trees. This area had been infested with Chinese wisteria, and the second picture is after we had cut it, what the trees looked like. A foliar application is when you are actually using a diluted version of herbicide. You're diluting it down, it's not as concentrated, and you are using a pump sprayer, a backpack sprayer, or some kind of larger spray equipment, and you are spraying the herbicide onto the leaves of the plant. And it does, before you do any spraying, you need to review the label. There are instructions on the label for how to spray, when to spray, what conditions are appropriate, when not to spray. And also, how do you mix these herbicides? Because most of them to be sprayed have to be mixed with water and so or other chemicals, and you have to understand the mixing instructions before you actually start mixing. And my employees, when we're mixing, we wear respirators because if you think about when you're opening the concentrated bottle is when you're breathing in the most amount of herbicide. So that when you're mixing things is also a good time to wear a respirator. All herbicides also have a safety data sheet. That's another good reference. If you can look that up online. The safety data sheet for any herbicide will tell you, there's a lot of information about the risks and the conditions where it can be used in that data sheet. Picture there is big buttercup or lesser celandine. That is one where digging it up is not advisable because all the little pieces of it will float down into a new area if it's along a creek, for example. If it floats down, a new infestation can start from the root fragments. So that is one that we definitely recommend spraying. This is a closer picture of fig buttercup. This may not be a big issue for the coastal area as much as, but in the Piedmont and the mountain regions, the fig buttercup is more of an issue. Foliar applications are only effective at certain times of the year. Some treatments are good in the spring, and others should be done in the fall. The PPE you should definitely be considering that if you're going to do any spraying. And you have to check the label for what's required, but we always recommend gloves, long sleeve shirts, pants, boots, and eye protection are kind of a minimum. You definitely do not want to get any of these herbicides into your eyes. And I would strongly, if people are considering spraying, even if the label doesn't tell you to wear a respirator, I would strongly consider wearing one. For instance, triclopyr makes me nauseous when I smell it, and so we're always wearing a respirator when we use triclopyr. And I have my employees wear it when we do glyphosate also. The benefits of foliar applications, they're effective at long-term control if you've gone through and removed a large amount of material, like larger privets, you can go back through and spray the smaller ones that come up if you don't have time to pull them all. And it's really the most effective method for certain species. So the picture on the right is Japanese knotweed. And Japanese knotweed has a very specific way that it needs to be treated, and it has to be sprayed at a certain time of the year. The drawbacks of foliar, the herbicide is dispersed in a wider area than just painting the stumps. There is some danger to the applicator if you don't follow the PPE requirements. You can damage non-target plants if there are plants growing in the same area as the invasive plants, you may damage some of those. And the applications need to be done at the appropriate times. For example, spring is a great time to spray English ivy when it's putting out new growth because the new growth is more susceptible to herbicide. Whereas wisteria, you would need to spray in the fall to get it to draw that herbicide into the root system. These are pictures of just an area where this picture on the left is an area that is completely infested with Chinese wisteria, and that area we had to spray it. There was just so much wisteria. And the picture on the right is an infestation of fig buttercup in apex, and you can see all the yellow that you see in the photo is fig buttercup growing all along this creek, and that area would need to be sprayed as well. Basal bark treatments are you're spraying a specifically designed herbicide and you're using a pump sprayer, a backpack sprayer, or another type of applicator. You're spraying just the bottom foot to 20 inches of the trunk. You're spraying the herbicide onto the trunk. And what happens is that special herbicide soaks into the trunk and travels into the root system. So most basal bark treatments are most effective in the fall. We do some in the summer. The picture there is a tree of heaven. So the tree of heaven treatment window is usually July through October. So you can start treating it in the late summer, but the fall is the best time because again, it's drawing that herbicide into the root system. You can also treat large vines growing along the ground, like wisteria vines. If they're growing along the soil, you can treat those with a basal treatment. This is a picture of Tree of Heaven, our client in Henderson. Basal bark treatments, again, are most effective in the summer, late summer and fall months. Again, I'm going to keep harping on PPE, but you just need to make sure that you protect yourself when you're doing these treatments. And you should check the label because there's a special section in the label about basal treatments and what you should protect yourself if you're going to do one. And the picture here is a princess tree. That's another one that you can do a basal treatment on because it's a suckering type tree like tree of heaven. The benefits, it's very effective on certain species where you can't, where cutting's not advised. If you have a tree of heaven that's like hanging over a parking lot or a building or a trail where people are walking, you would have to cut that down. But if it's an area where it's not a danger to fall on something, it's best to just treat the tree of heaven and leave them, and they will die on their own. The drawbacks, sometimes the specialized herbicides are more expensive. There are some dangers if you do not follow the PPE requirements. There sometimes can be harm to a non-target species, not as broadly as when you're doing foliar work. And as I mentioned, it shouldn't be used where a dying tree, if the tree is dying and it would fall, that you can't do it if there's a risk that it would fall on something or someone. And hack and squirt treatments are used on larger trees. If the basal treatment, if the tree is too large for a basal treatment, you can do a hack and squirt treatment. And that means you're taking a hatchet or a machete and you're making little cuts in the trunk of the tree. You need to cut into the layer of the cambium layer of the trunk and cut a little, not the whole way through the tree, but cut into the trunk and you spray a little bit of herbicide into the cuts. And what happens is that the tree will absorb that herbicide down into the root system. You don't cut all the way around because that would be what we call girdling. And if you did that to a tree of heaven, it would start suckering. So you space the cuts, you space them out around the trunk of the tree based on its size. So you're making these little cuts and you're spraying herbicide into, some people use a little spray bottle. You can use a backpack sprayer, whatever you have available to spray the herbicide into the little cuts. But you space them out around the trunk and you treat each cut. And it does take a little while for this to work. It's not going to be an instant, the tree is not going to die instantly. This is a picture of a tree of heaven that's been hacked and squirted. Again, that is most effective in the late summer and fall. PPE, you definitely, when you are squirting and hacking into a tree, you definitely need to make sure to protect your eyes. The only time I've ever had herbicide in my eyes was when I was doing hack and squirt and it splashed up at me. Depending on the herbicide, you should definitely consider wearing a respirator. And some of the labels will actually address hack and squirt specifically in the label. So you have to make sure you read that section. This is a picture of a tree of heaven that was treated, and then the beetles moved in and actually were doing most of the killing for us. The tree was so weak that it was being attacked by pests. The benefits of hack and squirt, it can be used on certain species where cutting is not advised, and it uses less herbicide than other treatments. You're only using a small amount because you're spraying it into the cuts. The drawbacks, the research I've been seeing lately is that basal treatments are more effective than hack and squirt. It also, if it's a drought, the effectiveness of this treatment goes down if we're in a drought because the tree is not moving as much sap during a drought. And the application window is smaller because it has to be done in the late summer fall time period. If you want more information about controlling these different methods and controlling invasives, the one that it's a long document, but the management guide for invasive plants in southern forests is a really good reference. It's put out by the USDA, and you can find it online. It's a long document, but you can find the section that you need. Invasive.org is Gloria mentioned Bugwood earlier from the University of Georgia. They do a lot of research on invasive plants and invasive species at the University of Georgia. So invasive.org is run by them. Um, there is a manual that the NC Botanical Garden put out on controlling invasive plants. It's a little tricky to find on their website. You have to go to the Resources for Gardeners tab, and there's a pamphlet in there called Controlling Invasive Plants. And the North Carolina Invasive Plant Council has just redone their website, and it's actually a lot better than it used to be. It used to be a Weebly website, and it drove us nuts. And they've actually made it better now. There's a lot more information on there. And the one cool thing about the Invasive Plant Council website is you can sign up to volunteer at an invasive removal event. There's a lot of events with Rewild, NC, and Keep Durham Beautiful, where there, and also the city of Raleigh does volunteer events as well. I don't want to just promote Keep Durham Beautiful, but there's a lot of volunteer invasive removal events that you can do based on that website. And I'll put up my information here. If there's something that we didn't cover today, and I realize we have like 10 minutes for questions, but if there's something that I didn't cover today, or if you need help with something, that is our email address, and we do have a Facebook and Instagram page. So I'll turn it over to Christy and see what kind of questions are coming in.
Thank you, Robbie.
Yeah, thank you, Robbie. That was
I feel like I went too fast in that section.
No,
Trying to leave questions. Time for questions.
no, that was great. So you answered a lot of things. There was a lot of there were questions specifically about how to best remove specific non-native invasive plants, and you covered
Okay.
several of them. I guess I'm
Okay.
gonna bring one up to the top that came up a few times, and that was frustration with trying to remove thorny olive. It sounds like some people
Yeah.
have tried a lot of different methods and it keeps
Yeah.
coming back, and some people
Yeah.
mentioned they saw it in other places in their neighborhood as well. So since that one was
Yeah.
mentioned many times, I thought I would bring
So
that one up.
we will start that with cutting and painting the stump. We will start with a cut stump treatment, and sometimes you have to go back and either recut it and paint the regrowth, or you can spray the regrowth. But it is not one that dies easily. And it's not a very enjoyable plant. I don't know why it's so popular. The thorns are nasty. They'll go right through your glove. I mean, several of us have had thorny olive thorns in our fingers and hands because the thorns go right through your gloves. It's not a fun one to deal with, definitely. I wish it wasn't so widely planted for being an evergreen. But I would say start with a cut stump and then monitor to see if you need to recut it and retreat it or spray it. I would definitely try to do it in the late summer or fall, because cutting it now in the spring, I just don't think it would work well.
Thank you. So for many of the other species that have been mentioned, I know you shared some resources, and I actually dropped the link to the one at the Botanical Garden because I found it while you were talking.
Like it was hard for me to find it. It took me a few minutes.
Yeah. So will those share like specific, what methods are best for which plants, since there's so many different
Yeah,
ways?
it may not. The problem with removal work is it's really dependent on the situation. So it's hard to give blanket advice, because if someone lives near a creek, that would be really different advice than if you lived in a forest, because if you're near a creek, you really have to be careful of the water and what herbicide you're using, if you're using it, or if you're disturbing the soil, are you causing an erosion problem? So it really depends on the person's situation, it makes it frustrating for people because we can't give them a one size fits all answer. Um, so, for example, my crew today is out near a creek, so they're being really careful. We're not digging anything; we're cutting bamboo. Um, and the people near the creek are using aquatic safe for the cut stump. Um, and the people away from the creek are using regular herbicide. So if there's anything else, it's hard, it's frustrating because I can't give like one size fits all advice.
Yes, yeah. So some of these involve some nuance based on the situation and the species. So I imagine other professionals who are, they can contact you. I imagine there's other professionals who have like pesticide certification. So that's certainly something to look
Yeah, some of the
for.
lawn companies, I mean, the lawn companies, if they're spraying herbicide, the law says at least one person in the company has to have a license. And then all of the other employees can work under that license. So not everyone that's going out and doing spraying may have a license. But somebody in the company has to, if they're charging money for it. Um, but no, I don't. I mean, I saw Carol was in the group earlier. I have worked at Carol's in Emerald Isle because she couldn't find someone to do what we do out that way. I don't know if that's changed, but like I said, it when I started the business, there just weren't that many people doing it for residential clients. Um, so I understand the frustration because people want to make their yards better, and there just aren't as many people to help them.
Yeah, that's a good point. So an herbicide question.
Yeah.
So there's a question about how do you apply concentrated herbicide for cut stump and similar treatments if it's not on the label? Like it sounds
Um,
like maybe it's not always everything's not always spelled out on the label.
not everything's on the label because a lot of these labels are they're only writing them in the idea of using it on agricultural
Mm,
in farming. They've started to add more to the label about using them on invasive species as this becomes more of a problem. We buy NASEMA sells it's called a buckthorn blaster, and it's a little dauber bottle that you can put herbicide, and it's specifically designed. NASEMA is I forget what it all stands for, but it's the National Association of Invasive Species Management, I believe. And so they sell buckthorn blasters, and that's what we use. There's also a thing called Daubit. It's just a little dauber bottle, um, and you can put herbicide into a dauber bottle. Um, it may not be listed in the label because they haven't gotten they weren't anticipating that people would use it for cut stump when they wrote those labels, I think.
that's a good point. I'm going to point people to the chat before you leave to, if you don't mind, filling out our survey, and I'm going to get back to questions here. There was a question, so about wide scale, broader removal. Are there grants that local governments can find to do their work? And I'm going to
I
answer and say, yes, I know there are, but I don't
okay.
certainly look at your community foundations in your neighborhood focused grants from other local governments. But go ahead, Robbie.
I'm not aware. There are definitely since we're a commercial business, we don't do a lot of grant applying, but I know Keep Durham Beautiful does, apply for grants for certain projects. Um, I'm more aware of people that give away like native plants as far more than like removal work. Because we work for a couple of churches and they've gotten free plants from like Backyard Butterflies in Hillsborough does a grant program for giving away native plants to schools and churches and organizations. Um, and there's also a grant for churches that want to install natives. There's a grant that only applies to churches. So, I'm not sure of invasive grants for invasive removal.
Thanks.
Chrissy, I have one question that I saw earlier, if I could just throw it in. Somebody asked if it was okay to compost privet. The city asked if, I guess people are cutting the privet and they want to know if it was okay to compost it.
Um, I think I think the only danger would be if it's got ripe berries.
Hmm.
I think if people were cutting it down, the problem with privet is as the climate's been getting warmer, the privets are burying longer.
Mm.
And so we are finding privets with berries like in the fall and all the way through the winter. So I think the only danger would be if you're composting. There are ways to kill the seeds.
Hmm.
I think that would need to be something that was considered.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do that with like Japanese knotweed has to have like to dispose of that, you have to be like they have to have a special certification to dispose of knotweed. But like for privet, I think as long as it what we'll do a lot of times is we'll either haul it to the landfill or the yard waste center, or if the person is open to it, we'll build like a wildlife habitat out of the cut privets. We'll make a pile
Okay.
and like raccoons could live in it or, other animals could live in it. But I think composting, I think the only danger would be if the berries were
Berries.
ripe,
Yeah.
I think.
That makes sense.
Or if it had,
Right.
if it wasn't privet, if it had like active seeds that were ripe seeds, viable seeds. Yeah, I think that would be
Sounds
the
like
only
good.
danger.
Yeah.
So we're about at the end. I did want to ask one thing, and maybe this is Gloria. Somebody suggested sending an email follow-up with links to the resources that were mentioned, as far as the ones that were
Yeah, I
posted
think
in the presentation.
yes, we can do that. And Robbie actually had said before that he would answer any unanswered questions. And I think that we have a manageable number of unanswered
Yeah,
questions.
I don't mind if people send me an email. It may not be answered immediately because I get a lot of emails, but I will try to get back. And it's hard because it really depends on the person's situation. So we will go to a property and we'll look at what they have and where they are and what and we have to design a plan based on that property.
Yeah.
So it's hard to give advice without knowing the specifics, but I can try. I can try.
Yeah. So thank you. So yeah, if you did have a question about a specific plant or method that we couldn't get to, you are welcome to email Robbie at the email, and sounds like we can email out links to things that were shared. So yeah.
And we'll
Gloria, you
take
wanna
this
wrap it up?
list. I'll take this list too and share it with Robbie. We could say, okay, maybe we could divide and conquer. It's like, okay, I can answer that, you can answer that.
Okay.
Or maybe some of our CLI partners also might be able to help us with some of these. So yeah, no, that was great. Thank you so much for coming, Robbie.
Thank you for
I
having me.
really appreciate it.
Yeah.
There are lots of comments about what great information that they received today. Yeah.
It's definitely something that we're passionate about, protecting the environment. All my employees are doing it because we want to protect the environment. So, and then when you see these areas that are just being taken over by these invasive plants, it's just really it's devastating to see. But then when you go back to an area where you've worked and you see these native plants just coming back, all they were waiting for was a chance to live. Like once you remove English ivy and they finally get some sunlight, there's just plants will pop up. It's great that's the fun part to see the follow-up work. So
Well, we appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we thank everybody for logging on and staying with us, and you will have a chance to access the webinar again and go ahead and sign up for March's webinar. Hope to see you there.
Great. And
Have a great day.
Last chance to fill out our evaluation. I just dropped it in the chat. You can grab it before we close. We'd appreciate it. All right.
All right, great.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Christy.